I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. The pandemic has changed the way we eat. Our food choices, especially when we're stressed, can impact our mood. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Usually around this time, people are looking forward to festive occasions. But this year, parties and celebrations have to be pared down for safety. We can still have food that makes us feel good, though.
Dr. Uma Naidu is a psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. She has recommendations on foods to fight depression and anxiety.
Not only foods, but herbs and spices can make a difference, too.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, improving your mood with food.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, many previous studies have shown that following a Mediterranean diet has cardiovascular benefits. Such an eating pattern leans heavily on vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, and is light on meat and sweets. Now, scientists have tested a green Mediterranean diet and found that substituting plant protein for the meat is even more helpful. The research was conducted in Israel and included 3 groups of overweight individuals. One group was advised on healthful eating and encouraged to be more active. A second group was instructed on a calorie-restricted traditional Mediterranean diet along with physical activity. The third group was also encouraged to exercise and told to follow the green Mediterranean diet with walnuts and duckweed as protein sources instead of meat. They were also advised to drink 3 to 4 cups of green tea daily. After 6 months, people following the green Mediterranean diet had lost the most weight, almost 14 pounds, compared to nearly 12 pounds lost by those on the traditional Mediterranean diet. Those following the standard healthy diet as a control group lost around 3 pounds. Reductions in inflammatory markers, blood lipids, and blood pressure followed the same pattern, so that those in the green Medi group had the greatest drop in their 10-year Framingham risk score. The investigators think this dietary pattern has the potential to be a major contributor to public health.
Cocoa flavanols can make blood vessels more flexible. There's growing evidence that these compounds may be beneficial for cognitive function. A new study published in the journal Scientific Reports suggests a mechanism for the cognitive benefits. Researchers at the University of Birmingham in the UK teamed up with investigators at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. They recruited healthy young adults and had them breathe carbon dioxide-enriched air. This puts a strain on the blood vessels in the brain. They then measured blood flow in the frontal cortex. The subjects were pre-treated with either high flavanol cocoa or low flavanol processed cocoa. The volunteers were asked to perform challenging cognitive tasks during the experiments. When they drank the high flavanol cocoa prior to the carbon dioxide challenge, they were faster at solving problems, and their brains became oxygenated more quickly and more thoroughly. The researchers suggest that diets that incorporate plant-based flavanols could improve blood oxygenation and cognitive performance, especially in high-risk individuals, such as smokers and people with diabetes or hypertension. Older people might also benefit.
Another diet that people often follow for health reasons also made news this week. However, the findings were not rosy. British scientists collected extensive diet and health information on more than 50,000 Britons between 1993 and 2001. They then followed their subjects' health for approximately 18 years. People who followed a vegetarian diet during that time had a 9% higher risk of breaking a bone. Those who were vegans had a 43% higher risk of fracture. These are relative risks. The vegans had 14.9 more hip fractures per 1,000 people over 10 years, but there were no significant differences in the rate of broken wrists or ankles. Vegans consumed less calcium and protein, but it's not clear from this study whether these dietary factors were responsible for the difference in fracture risk.
Doctors have long assumed that all blood pressure medicines are similarly effective in protecting people from heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure. A study published in The Lancet examined data from 4.9 million patients in real-world situations. The researchers discovered that old-fashioned diuretics such as hydrochlorothiazide were more effective than many popular blood pressure medicines. For initial treatment, the diuretics outperformed ACE inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, and ARBs. There were fewer heart attacks, strokes, and hospitalizations for heart failure when hypertensive patients began treatment with thiazide diuretics. These patients also experienced fewer side effects such as digestive distress or kidney problems. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. We're getting close to the end of 2020, and it certainly has been a long, trying year. Between election frenzy, COVID-19, and its impact on schools and the economy, a lot of people are feeling anxious and overwhelmed. Many are also depressed by celebrating family occasions over Zoom instead of in person.
A lot of us have had our healthy eating habits disrupted by the pandemic. Staying at home might mean that we're getting access to snack food. When we're feeling stressed, lots of us look for something sweet or salty to pop in our mouths. Does that actually make us feel better?
Today, we'll find out how we can use food to improve our mood. Are there certain foods we should avoid and others that might be especially helpful against depression or anxiety?
Our guest today is Dr. Uma Naidu. She is Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist, and she also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidu is the author of This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Uma Naidu.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Naidu, I suspect that when you were in medical school and when you were doing your psychiatry residence, you were being taught that medicines were the way to treat mental illness. We had great drugs for anxiety and depression and even for schizophrenia. And when I was working in a neuropharmacology laboratory at the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute outside of Princeton, New Jersey, my colleagues really thought that they were going to discover the cure, the magic medicine to treat everything from bipolar disorder to schizophrenia to depression, and that if you just had the right pill, case over. You're done. We're home free. And yet you've kind of moved beyond that. Not to say that medicines don't have their place, but you've been looking at nutrition, you've been looking at food. How did you make that transition?
Interestingly, Joe, it partly comes from my background being from a large South Asian family where there were Ayurvedic practitioners, but also allopathic medical doctors practicing medicine, but a focus on nutrition, delicious food, and a love for science. And when I started residency, you're absolutely right, I was learning about psychopharmacology and really understood that there were some pretty devastating side effects, which not every patient may develop, but I became aware of that. One of the ways in which a switch actually occurred was when I was a very junior resident and a patient yelled at me, blaming me for weight gain that he had only 2 weeks after I prescribed a medication. And I already had his baseline weight, so I knew it wasn't really my fault. But I was pretty junior and not used to being yelled at by a patient. But in that moment that he was upset, I looked at what he was drinking, and it was a very large size 20-ounce Dunkin' Donuts coffee, which is typical to the Boston area. And I said to him, partly wanting to distract him, but actually making the connection in my mind, what do you put in your coffee? And he told me, and it ended up when we worked it out and we looked at the computer screen together and looked at some nutrition, he was having more than a quarter cup of cream and about 8 teaspoons of sugar in that coffee every single day. And he usually had at least another size during the day, maybe a smaller one. And I was able to very rapidly translate to him that it was the number of calories, that he was consuming. Largely, I would say the sugar calories and how those were adding up in his body. And that to me was a very real connection. In that moment, I realized that there was a way to translate information and help someone make a lifestyle change. So maybe it was less sugar in his coffee, or switching to a smaller size. Maybe it was, embracing more exercise. But whatever it was, it opened up the door to a longer conversation. And for me, that really was a moment when I began to start putting it together in a different way.
Well, that really sounds important, and we're going to explore more of that throughout this hour. But as you were talking, I was thinking there are some psychiatric medications that do cause weight gain.
Yes.
No matter what, right?
Absolutely. So many of the medications, while some of them have a certain level of effectivity, there are also side effects. And not everyone develops the same side effect or the same extent. But they are concerning. Some side effects involve weight gain. Some involve, a lowering of libido. Others involve metabolic changes. And I think that they can be quite concerning. And as Joe mentioned, I mean, there's a place for medications, but I do think we need to be widening the number of options that individuals have in order to improve their mental health, especially when they're not acutely ill and needing hospitalization, or acutely suicidal, severely psychotic, manic, where, an immediate and more acute treatment is needed. But that being said, food or nutrition can always be part of a comprehensive treatment plan.
Now, Dr. Naidu, we have in front of us your terrific book. This is Your Brain on Food, and we are talking about the ideas in it for this hour. You are described on the book jacket as a nutritional psychiatrist. Would you please tell us, what is nutritional psychiatry?
Sure. It's a more nascent term for work that some people have been doing, certainly like myself, for quite some time. For decades, the psychiatry research has included looking at nutrients, vitamins, and their impact on various illnesses in mental health, such as mood disorders and folate and methylfolate, omega-3 fatty acids, and others for different conditions. But, nutritional psychiatry really brings it together for people, because if you think about the last meal that you ate, we very seldom eat one ingredient or one item only. We eat a composed plate of food, a meal that has some balance to it, and sometimes it may not be a healthy meal, but it's usually not just one ingredient. And I think that for me is a great way to explain that what nutritional psychiatry does is brings together the different nutrient values of foods and provides the information that we have at the current time to make the link between mental health conditions and any improvement you can get from certain foods. But also also what I cover is things like foods to avoid if you have a certain condition, because I find that my patients find that extremely helpful to know things that they should be wary of, which may enhance symptoms.
We'll come back to that shortly, but I'd like to talk a bit about your residency training. Mm-hmm. There you were at Harvard, and for reasons that remain mysterious to us, and we'd like to know more, you enrolled in the Cambridge School of Culinary Arts, which is like, wait a minute, it wasn't as if you weren't already really busy. How did that happen?
So this really stems from two actually pretty funny factors. One is, although I'm a chef, I only started cooking later in life, because I grew up in this large family, and there were always grandmothers, aunts, older cousins, mums in the kitchen cooking. And I was always hanging around, but I wasn't expected to cook. But I learned how to bake because my mom, who was a physician herself, knew and recognized that I loved science. So cut to, studying and later on in my life when I moved further away from home, I really needed to nourish myself, and I had to learn how to cook. So it came to me much later on, and I found it to be really a space of mindfulness for me and a creative space that I really enjoyed learning how to cook. And I made mistakes, but at the same time, I couldn't afford cable television, and the person on public television in the Boston area was Julia Child. The series called The French Chef, and I really gained a lot of confidence by watching her, and she ultimately became my food hero. So as I've, followed my cooking journey myself and entered residency, learned more about all of these pieces, I grew to have a real love for food and cooking. And when I understood that she had done it really later in her life, really a second career, I thought to myself, why not me? And when I went to culinary school, I wish I could say I had a grand plan of it being part of how I practiced my work or my career, but I didn't. I really followed the passion for wanting to learn how to cook creatively and learn more. But it ended up coming together very nicely. So that was really just something I did to fulfill my love for cooking.
Dr. Naidoo, Michelin star chef David Bouley has described you as the world's first triple threat in the food as medicine space. What's he talking about?
I think, from the conversation where he shared this, he put together the fact that my medical training in psychiatry, my interest in study of nutrition, and being professionally trained as a chef were three unique areas that had come together in a very cohesive way. And I think in some ways really helped me understand how this career really solidified for me. And it was a great mentorship moment.
You're listening to Dr. Uma Naidoo. She's Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. A board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist, she also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidoo is the author of This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more.
After the break, we'll find out about the gut-brain romance.
How does what you put in your stomach affect your brain?
It's not unusual for people to start munching on things when they feel stressed. Usually, stress eating doesn't involve the healthiest food choices.
When people find they're eating because they're feeling anxious or depressed, and who isn't these days, how can they stop stress eating?
Are there foods that can help us manage anxiety? Can we get them during a pandemic?
Dr. Naidoo will share a wonderful recipe for lentil and spinach soup.
How easy is it to make?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia Memory Plus. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia Memory Plus has 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that have been proven to help boost memory.
CocoVia Memory Plus is backed by 4 clinical trials that demonstrate improvement in 3 different aspects of memory: long-term memory, spatial memory, and word recall. The studies show improved brain function in just 8 weeks.
You can try the benefits of CocoVia Memory Plus with a 25% discount off your first month. Use the code PEOPLES25. To get the full benefits, take it daily for 8 weeks. CocoVia is offering People's Pharmacy podcast listeners a 10% discount on subscriptions. That code is PEOPLES10. Learn more at cocovia.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com/health-club.
We've spoken before on the People's Pharmacy about the gut-brain connection. Mostly, we're referring to ways in which the microbes in our intestinal tracts influence neurotransmitters in our central nervous system. Are there other links?
Today, we're considering how our diets can affect emotional health. How do the foods we eat affect our moods as well as our thinking?
We're talking with Dr. Uma Naidu. She is Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist. She also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidu is the author of This Is Your Brain on Food.
Dr. Naidu, we've heard before about the gut-brain connection, but we haven't heard about the gut-brain romance. The way you've put it is something quite new and exciting. Can you please give us a brief overview? Why do you call it a romance?
You know, I thought it was a great way to describe it, because a romance, while it might be wonderful and have moments of champagne and strawberries, it might also have the not so great moments. And to me, that really does also describe the gut-brain axis, because it turns out that although the gut and brain are in very different parts of the body, they originate from the same cells in the developing embryo, and then are connected throughout life by the 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve, which really behaves like a two-way superhighway, allowing bidirectional messages between the gut and the brain and the gut. So there are days when, an individual may not make the best or healthiest choices, and the chemical messages may therefore not be feeding back the best messages to the brain, and may not be the great or best or most romantic day. And the opposite is true as well. When we make healthier choices for our gut and for our brain, we also impact these messages in a positive way. So I thought it was a great way just to convey the message to people of what this connection means, and the fact that while serotonin is called the happiness hormone, more than 90% of the serotonin receptors are found in the gut as well.
Dr. Naidu, I think that our listeners have probably gotten quite fed up with me when I tell this story, but it kind of illustrates the point you're making. I used to do an awful lot of traveling, a lot of book tours, something that you might be able to relate to. And oftentimes I'd end up in an airport and there'd be a mechanical problem with the airplane, or there'd be a weather delay or something, and I'd get very anxious and very frustrated waiting for an announcement about what was going to happen with that airplane. Mm-hmm. And my go-to, what I'd call comfort food, not really food, but it was to head to the candy store and buy a big box of Good and Plenty, my favorites. Mm-hmm. There was a little licorice and a lot of sugar. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, I'm just going to have a couple, just 3 or 4. And then it would be 7 or 8, and then it would be the whole box. Mm-hmm. And usually within about 45 minutes, I'd start to feel really bad. I mean, really bad. Just out of sorts. My anxiety was even higher than it was before I started. And I learned over time that those Good and Plenties were not my friend. They were actually my enemy. And just by experience, I discovered that, that wasn't the solution to my anxiety, that maybe a little packet of nuts would do a lot better. Can you give us a little sense of this gut-brain connection in terms of what we put in our gut and how it affects our brain?
Well, what I love about what you said, Joe, is it really describes it very well, because there are moments when we are overwhelmed by a sense of stress or uncertainty, as we are in current times. And when we're stressed, our brain becomes hypersensitive to the rewards of tasty, high fat and high sugar foods. One of the reasons that we tend to sometimes crave those foods, but then we want more of them. You very eloquently described what I call body intelligence, which is someone responding to how their body is reporting information back to them when they eat something. And you paid attention to it and realized that while you were trying to stave off anxiety, you were actually driving your anxiety, which has been shown in research that sugar and added sugars actually drive and worsen anxiety. And I'm not even including, the other ingredients in those candies. The interesting thing about this loop is that when we choose those either simple carbohydrate foods or those highly sugared foods or pastries or pretzels, our insulin level increases. And when our insulin level in the body increases, it allows more tryptophan, which is the natural amino acid building block for serotonin, to enter the brain, where it does get converted to serotonin. So initially in the first few minutes, you may have a calming effect, or you may feel, well, what's Dr. Naidu saying? I actually feel good when I eat this. That wasn't the case with you, Joe. But sometimes a person might feel, I feel good. What's wrong with it? The problem is that these simple carbohydrates, for the reason I just mentioned, also become somewhat addictive. And while they make us happy, they also raise our blood sugar levels. And over time, those effects do impact the brain in terms of potential atrophy, potential higher predisposition to things like dementia. So, it's interesting that you noticed, and I'm glad you did. And I encourage people to pay attention when they may have developed a slightly unhealthy habit or stressed and are experiencing some stress eating, to really try to figure out for themselves a way to handle that, because it has longer-term negative effects on your brain.
Dr. Naidu, you actually introduce us early in your book to a patient who was doing that kind of eating, a fellow named Ted, 39 years old, successful entrepreneur, but depressed. And he would come home from work late, have his supper, then have his ice cream, and then watch the news. And while he was watching the news, he'd snack on the candy from the kids' snack cupboard. And he was kind of a mess by the time he got to your office. How did you two get him straightened out?
I think it's interesting. A lot of whether someone does start to feel better comes from their attitude, their investment, their willingness to make a change. And, I like to compare getting into a healthier food routine with a good skincare routine, because when you cleanse your skin and tone and use the appropriate moisturizer, as your esthetician or beautician might tell you, you may notice some positive changes in your skin. When you do notice that, do you suddenly stop, using your skincare routine? Well, most people don't, but some people might. And in a similar way, part of really helping Ted was what he was willing to buy into and what he was willing to do to work with me to make those changes, and really understanding where the issues were. The fact that he was so stressed when he got home, he was hungry, he hadn't been eating during the day, when he did eat, he was eating fast food meals, which were really not satiating. Then he was going to the vending machine. So some of it really involved stepping back from those unhealthy habits, not changing them all at the same time, learning to pack a healthier lunch that was filling and enjoyable with flavors and tastes that he enjoyed, and something he wanted to eat. So it was really building in some almost what I really talk about in terms of pillars of healthy eating or mental health, and building in those habits that he started to embrace one by one. And as he started to feel better was when he really began to do them more regularly, build in more habits, and build up a solid plan.
I'd like to ask about anxiety, because I know that for a lot of people, myself included, these are anxious times.
Yeah.
I mean, this pandemic is not going to go poof and disappear overnight.
Yeah.
And there's snack foods. I mean, we tend to have those crackers and cookies and chips and stuff around the house. And now that we're around the house more than ever, it's easy. It's easy to go, I'm feeling a little hungry. Maybe I'll go for the cookies. Mm-hmm. And how do we get out of those kinds of patterns, especially in these days?
I feel that compared to the start of the pandemic, when some supermarket shelves were empty and there was a sense of panic, and for obvious reasons, and because we were concerned, many of the processed food sales went up. We know that from statistics. I do feel that where the uncertainty is continuing, it is a good time, a good moment for us to take a pause and decide how we can start to maybe step back from some of these habits. I'm not assuming, a judgment or blame around this, because it's been a very difficult time for everyone. But if we can each think to ourselves, what is one thing that I've started doing that I wish I could undo? And just start with that one simple thing. That would be the first step. One of the other steps is, how do I change my environment and have healthier options? Because if your kitchen cabinet does, like my patient Ted, have all of the kiddies' snacks and things that the children were snacking on, but he tapped into. If your cabinets have that, it's very hard for your brain to not remember that and decide, oh, maybe I'll have some celery sticks. Your brain is going to remember those snacks and want to get them. Part of it is how we handle our environment, and should we start not buying those ingredients, should we start replacing them? And the third idea that I have is, try to think of a snack that you've gotten into over the pandemic, maybe, that you want to step back from and change. And what I like to do is create a healthy version of that recipe, or healthy, tasty food that you can have instead. So, salty chips or pretzels can actually be spinach or kale chips, 20-minute recipe in the oven with tons of delicious spices that would be good for your brain, and a crispy snack for the whole family, just made on a sheet pan. So if it's something super sweet that you crave, maybe it's making a fruit-based ice cream, such as made with fresh bananas or a banana avocado mousse. Again, I'm not asking you to eat the entire bowl of it or the entire tub of the ice cream you make. It's still a portion control, but you can have fun with it. It's going to have fruit in it, and even though some of the fruit may be a higher glycemic fruit, it's still a healthier option than the processed ice cream and other foods that you might have. So some of it is finding a clever hack that your brain can get used to and that you can easily make, and then have that in a portion controlled way, not every day and all day long, but have it as the snack you turn to, and have a few of those on hand that you can go to instead of the cookies, because when the cookies are there, or the candy that you like, it's hard to stay away from them.
Are there foods that specifically can help us manage anxiety better?
There are. Some of the foods that I feel are super helpful are the omega-3 fats found, which many people associate with depression, but they actually have been found in human trials to improve anxiety as well. So including things like omega-3 rich foods, fatty fish such as salmon, mackerel, sardines are some examples, and plant-based options, which are in chia seeds, flax seeds, algae, sea vegetables, are all some good options for you. And some other things include adding in some prebiotic-rich foods and probiotic-rich foods, which are good gut foods and help to even out the microbiome and help you in that way. And high fiber or more complex carbohydrate foods also help you, because you are not compare eating a roasted vegetable dish to a sugary donut. When you have a highly sugared food or simple carbohydrate food, it breaks down very quickly, and you often have either sugar crash or you may not feel that good. But a more highly fiber food, which is more nutrient dense, will keep you full for longer. By doing that, it's also not having your blood sugar go, through a yo-yo cycle. So it's not going up and down. It's more even and you feel calmer. So those are some ways to get started. But my other tips are things like turmeric with a pinch of black pepper, great to add to a soup or smoothie or soup or tea if you don't cook with it. But it's something that has really hit the high notes with conditions like anxiety. And then there are a few other foods that come into it as well. But those are some to get started.
In just 1 minute, can you describe to us an example of that type of high fiber food you were just mentioning?
Sure. So high fiber foods, you can only get fiber not from seafood or animal protein. So you think about many vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains, as well as fruit. So those are really good ways to get your fiber into your life.
Dr. Naidu, I suspect that you are fond of lentils, and you have a lentil soup with spinach recipe. Tell us why that's one of your favorites.
So the dal recipe is, in Indian cuisine, lentils are usually made in many different ways with animal proteins, seafood proteins, but also simply with vegetables and yummy spices. It's one of my favorites because it was something that I really relied upon in terms of, I kind of converted it into having it more like a soup when I was in treatment for cancer. And it was just a very easy and nourishing dish that I know was bringing back a ton of nutrients to my body, was simple to eat, was soothing and nourishing. So it's something that, was not only from my childhood and something I learned to make, but I knew was doing my body good.
And how easy is it to make?
It really, well, I find it pretty easy to make because I don't think there are too many steps involved. But I think it really comes down to understanding how to work with lentils and either pressure cooking them, or my new favorite kitchen toy is the Instant Pot, which makes things much faster. But you can also, soak lentils overnight, which I like to do, rinse them out, boil them, and they don't have to be entirely like entirely smooth. It could actually have some texture in it. And then you use the spices and saute them and add in your vegetables that you'd like and put these together. So it's not, to me, it's a pretty straightforward recipe, but then I have to remember that I also didn't know how to cook for a while, and I had to learn those steps. So I just wouldn't say it's an intimidating recipe. It's one that many people can try.
You're listening to Dr. Uma Naidu. She's Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Naidu is a board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist. She also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidu is the author of This is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more.
After the break, how can spices improve your mental health?
Does tea affect mental health?
Are there seasonal foods like fall vegetables that could be helpful against the winter blues?
Dr. Naidu has a recipe for scallops and rosemary. It sounds so good. You'll love it.
How can we put mood-improving foods on our menu every day?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This podcast is brought to you by the Verrazana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to sickness. Online at Verrazana, peoplefarmacy.com/health-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a supplement with 750 milligrams of cocoa flavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that help support memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com/health-club.
Today we're talking about food and mood. How do our food choices affect our emotions?
Our guest is Dr. Uma Naidu. She's Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist. She also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidu is the author of This Is Your Brain on Food.
Dr. Naidu, in your book, This Is Your Brain on Food, you talk about spices and mental health. That's a surprise. What spices can affect mental health and how?
So I guess part of this comes from my knowledge of spices growing up in a South Asian family, but also then understanding, as I understood nutrition and studied more, that things like turmeric, black pepper, capsaicin, which is from in chilies, paprika, which comes from red bell peppers, all actually have really important health benefits. And some of the ones that surprisingly hit the high notes in mental health are turmeric, as well as saffron, to name a few. Turmeric is the active ingredient is called curcumin, and it is activated or made more bioavailable to your brain and body by up to about 2,000% with the addition of piperine from black pepper. So my little hack there is that whenever you're using turmeric, even if you don't cook with it, add in a pinch of black pepper to a quarter teaspoon of turmeric at least once a day, just because it has some super health benefits in terms of being an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, helps mood, helps anxiety as well. And then, I also thought it was interesting that there were certain herbs that helped to lift brain fog. And, I think that what's helpful for people to know there is that there are certain things like fresh peppermint, sage, thyme, parsley, and dried Mexican oregano that have a antioxidant called luteolin, which helps to lift brain fog that has been shown in a few studies. So I think it was fascinating to me that we often take spices for granted, but they are salt-free, sugar-free, calorie-free, and so easy to add into different foods that they are, worth including.
I'm also fascinated by the idea that you used spices to help one of your patients who was struggling with memory loss. How did that work?
Absolutely. So it turns out that turmeric has actually been studied in terms of cognition and memory. And what I basically did is started to, I had been reviewing the data on the different spices that helped with memory, and we came up with different recipes and ways to include things like turmeric with black pepper, cinnamon, saffron, rosemary, ginger, and sage were the ones that were specifically more associated with memory and cognition, and tried to build those into simple and easy recipes to use. And I think that is an easy way for anyone to incorporate these types of spices, whether it's roasted vegetables. Sometimes it could be a turmeric tea with a pinch of black pepper, a saffron risotto. It could be many different delicious foods that you add them into.
And of course, curry, because turmeric is the star spice in curry powder, right?
Exactly. So turmeric is on its own one of the many different Indian spices, and it's very frequently, because of how it's sort of evolved in British culture, called curry. But curry usually in South Asian recipes has so many different spices, including cinnamon. There's a garam masala. There are spices like coriander and cumin and turmeric all together. So yes, it is frequently associated with curry spice, especially because of the bright yellow hue.
I'd like to ask you about another herb from India, ashwagandha. Now, it may not be used in the culinary arts, but our dear friend, Dr. Tirone Lodog, has described a condition called tired but wired. People who come home after a hard day and they just can't calm down, they can't get to sleep, and they're just exhausted, but their brain is turning over a mile a minute. And she has recommended ashwagandha. Have you ever heard of ashwagandha, and does it have a role?
I have heard of ashwagandha. It was not something that I included specifically in my book, because I really just tried to stick with healthy whole foods and spices that people can use in a culinary way. I know that there's some data on it. I'm just not familiar with the safety data on it. And when I'm not familiar with the safety data on someone on a certain ingredient or spice or herb, I prefer not to comment, just because those become really important for people to know if they're just going to try it out.
I am a tea drinker, and so I am interested in knowing whether tea can be helpful for our mental health, and if so, what types?
Tea is, incredibly soothing if it's something that you enjoy. So chamomile tea has definitely been shown to be helpful in conditions like anxiety, and the research bears out on that one. I like turmeric tea as well, but there are many other types to enjoy. For example, green teas have CG in them, which is super important and actually enlivens people and makes them a little bit more focused at times. So green teas can be helpful for the afternoons when someone might feel a slight slump in energy. I am a big fan of tea, and I think that it's really something to include and embrace in many aspects of mental well-being, because mostly because it has that soothing and wonderful effect.
I'd like to talk a bit about fall vegetables for mood, and also foods that we might be able to employ against the what we call the winter blues, when we don't get quite as much sunshine and when we're cooped up. Are there some foods and recipes that you're especially fond of for mood and the winter blues?
I think that we can go back to things like lentils. Those are easy to make. They can be made so many different ways, from a soup to a curry to a stew. They can be added with seafood or with vegetables or with meats to be a very hearty kind of stew. But also adding in the spices we talked about, I think, make different dishes both interesting and different. So you could get all involved with the fall vegetables that are all coming out, and use fall vegetables, but change up the spices is something that I like to do a lot, because you can then have the vegetables and eat them on different days, but have a very different flavor profile, which I think makes it quite interesting. I think that sheet pan baked dishes are really nice and easy for the fall, and a family could do, if you do animal or seafood protein, you could do that on half your sheet pan with a whole array of roasted vegetables, whether it's cauliflower, broccoli. Those are some of my favorites, and others, to make it easy and make that a pretty nutritious meal, and then maybe build out a nice fresh salad on the side. Even in fall, I would say, Joe, that I do like to still recommend, frequently eating salads and healthy greens, as well as multiple colored vegetables, so the rainbow of colors for vegetables, because the different colors bring back the polyphenols and antioxidants that we need, both for our brain health, but our gut health as well. So even though we make more hearty dishes, I would still suggest a salad on the side as well.
I was especially intrigued by your Southern French style scallops. And what I especially liked about this recipe was not just the omega-3s, because you talk about the memory boosting benefits, but you added rosemary. And
Yes.
we've had the pleasure of interviewing some researchers who have suggested that when they travel to Italy, there are certain villages that are very fond of rosemary, and that seems to make a difference with their cognitive abilities. Tell us a bit about rosemary and this Southern French style scallop recipe.
So one of the things I enjoyed was testing different recipes for the book. I'm sure you can relate to that because you seem to enjoy cooking. But it's true that rosemary has actually been studied in terms of cognition. And I think that it is an easy spice to add to, whether it's for vegetables or different types of dishes. For me, the way that I thought about the recipes and how to really design them was looking at the different foods that showed up as having positive effects for a certain condition, and then designing the recipe using as many of those ingredients. That's really how the recipe chapter came about. For me, it was one of the most challenging chapters because I wanted to test and retest and really make the recipes user-friendly, remembering that I had started to cook later in life and that anyone reading the book may not be someone who's cooking every day or maybe wanting to learn how to cook. So I included as many ingredients from that chapter, tested it, and thought that scallops would be a really interesting protein to use in it. So that was how it came to be.
And delicious, of course.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
That actually does bring up an issue of cooking. So many people don't cook. They may be too busy. They may never have learned. They just may not be interested. Do you have any tips for people who really have not developed a habit of cooking for themselves at home? Of course, now, in a time of COVID, they may have had to develop some of those habits and they may be struggling with it.
I think that everyone starts at a different a point. I know this mostly because of myself as well as people that I've worked with. I know that research, and I think this is important for us to know, very large research studies have shown that when we eat at home, we consume fewer calories. And when we eat at home, we consume fewer calories even if we're not following a special diet. So I would encourage those people who maybe they don't like cooking or they're not used to it to maybe start simply with something like putting a salad together where you may not have to cook each ingredient, but start to assemble something and get familiar with just working in your kitchen and trying to assemble something pretty simple. The other thing I suggest is sort of what I'd like to talk to people about, which is how to set up your kitchen and how to be efficient in your kitchen, because cooking doesn't have to be a chore and it doesn't have to be something that takes up a lot of time if you just do a little bit of planning. So something we call mise en place, or, things in its place, meaning that when you watch a cooking show or see chefs on television, they always have the ingredients laid out. And they do that because you want to be super efficient in the kitchen. And in a restaurant, you want to be especially efficient because guests are waiting to eat their dinner or their lunch. So having a few rules of how you go about it, starting with something simple that you feel you can try, and practicing it or not giving up if you should not get that recipe right, and trying again, and maybe looking for something simple that you feel you can achieve, even if it's putting together some overnight oats or making a chia pudding, which doesn't involve cooking. Simple things like that may help you gain confidence and then build up to more recipes, because I think that there's an argument to be made for using this time to maybe do a little bit of home cooking. And that is one easy way that we can bring in better nutrients into our diet and better brain food, as well as healthier options than fast food restaurants or restaurant eating, which, while it's great for entertainment, it may not always be the best nutritionally, depending on where you eat.
Dr. Naidu, as we wrap up, the idea of treating common mental health issues, depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, even insomnia, with foods and nutrients, I think that comes as a bit of a surprise to people because they think, well, there's a pill for that. Help us understand how we can integrate nutrients, foods, and sometimes even medications to treat these kinds of common conditions.
I think that's a great question because throughout my work, what I have felt is that food is something we eat every day. We all eat meals. We have to eat, and it's something that we have control over. So whereas a prescription, we sometimes feel like a physician is taking away control of a decision and asking you to take a pill for your better mental health. The truth is that food is an easy thing that you can do on your own. Food and nutritional psychiatry do not exclude the use of medications. As I said, I prescribe medications even now, and some of my patients have really gotten through very difficult times because of medication. But I feel that we need to allow for the fact that if we want to take things into our own hands and we're not severely or acutely ill, not needing an emergency room visit or call to your doctor because for some reason you're severely depressed or so anxious that you can't function, or have lost touch with reality, or have perhaps a manic episode from bipolar disorder, things that are acute need special attention and care in an emergency room, for example. But if you are just trying to feel better, get through this time of uncertainty, fortify your mental health, you can choose to eat healthier today with some simple, healthy changes which will positively impact your microbiome, positively impact your mental health. And I think that every person's starting place might be a different spot, but starting to incorporate slow, healthy habit changes will help them stick. If you try to change 8 things today, it's not likely to work. But if you try to change at least one thing today that you can do differently, or a healthy food that you can add back into your diet, or a healthy salad that you can start to make every day, those types of things will be easier for you to hold on to, change it to a good habit, and then continue doing those things. It really starts in a stepwise manner for most of my patients who've been successful.
Dr. Uma Naidu, thank you very much for this fascinating book, and thank you for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much, Terry. It was a pleasure to speak to you and Joe.
You've been listening to Dr. Uma Naidu. She's Director of Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, a board-certified psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist. She also serves on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Naidu is the author of This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com, now with a monthly health club plan.
And by Cocoa Via, with 450 milligram heart-healthy cocoflavanol products. More information at cocovia.com.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy episode, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1237. The number again, 800-732-2334. Online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the website, you can share your thoughts about today's show. You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post it on the website on Monday morning.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.